at least 4 or 5 ambulances by my count. Fire brigade, well, here's the truck itself. The grey at the top of your screen there is the building itself. So it's been travelling at some speed to have gone that distance into the department store. I can bring you the live pictures from central Stockholm as we bring in our correspondent Lisa Holland. We're hearing from the police in Sweden that the public are being advised to stay away from the city centre. Understandable.
Yes, and the latest information that we're getting here is actually reports that 3 people have been killed. And according to the Swedish broadcaster SVT, they're also reporting that shots have been fired. Now, it would seem that, as you say, a truck was involved in this incident. Reports as well that this was some kind of haulage vehicle, so suggestion that it was quite a large vehicle. We can see from those images as well. Now, it crashed into this department store right in the heart of Stockholm. And the news agency TT says also that several people have been taken away in ambulances, so suggestion that there have been a number of people who have been injured as well. Swedish police say they received calls about a person who was injured, others about this vehicle driving in the centre of Stockholm in a street which will be very well known to people who are familiar with this big Swedish city of Drottninggatan. A police spokeswoman saying that people have not been injured, but officially the police not yet confirming how many people have been killed. What we do know is that it apparently happened at about 3:40 p.m. local time in Stockholm this afternoon, and also pictures published in a Swedish newspaper show that this truck had gone into this department store, and I think that Arlen's, again for people who perhaps know that area, will know that it's one of the best known stores within that main street, one of those main streets.
Lisa, just to interrupt just for a second, Swedish security services have been telling Sky News the following, that it was, in their view, a deliberate attack. They are not using the word terrorism at the moment. A similar line from the police, in fact. They have said that they are investigating the possibility that this was a terrorist attack, but not confirming that it's so. No confirmation of gunfire, although just a little earlier we were speaking to Peter Wolodarski, a local journalist, who was suggesting that there were perhaps 2 incidents ongoing in the city at the same time. Frankly, there is always a degree of confusion at times like this, with people moving from one area to another. Swedish security services, however, saying that there were plenty of casualties. No words beyond that which we've had from the police thus far, though, in terms of fatalities. At least 2 people have died, but in a pedestrianised area, a truck travelling at speed, going into a shop front, little surprise that there have been 2 fatalities.
Yes, and clearly at this stage with all of these kinds of incidents, people don't want to necessarily leap onto a bandwagon to say vehicle used, vehicle-borne attack. This bears similarities, of course, to events in Nice and, of course, events on March 22nd in Westminster. But it is fair to say at the moment that SVT, the Swedish public service television station, are reporting that they are being told that Swedish police are treating this incident as a possible terror attack. People will know, of course, that if we cast our minds back to March 22nd here in the United Kingdom, there was a major terror incident involving one man, a vehicle, and a vehicle which of course ploughed into people on Westminster Bridge, then into a railing, then of course he got into the palace or the grounds of the Palace of Westminster, and at that point it was said by Islamic State that they were not saying they were responsible for it, but that they had inspired this man. Now, how true that is, we of course will never really particularly know, because he was shot dead by the security services at the scene. But the sense being that using a vehicle to carry out this kind of attack is a sort of modus operandi which has been inspired by Islamic State, and we've seen it put to effect, of course, in Nice and also in Berlin.
Well, a little earlier we spoke to Peter Wolodarski. He's a local journalist, and he provided us with a bit of insight into exactly what has been happening there, but also just exactly what the conditions are like on the streets of this pedestrianised area in central Stockholm.
Well, the very latest is that, and it's confirmed that, as you mentioned, a lorry has been driven into a department store in central Stockholm on this Friday afternoon, and 3 people have been killed, and armed police have cordoned off a major area. An unconfirmed report says that the lorry driver first drove into people on Drottninggatan, which is which is one of the main central streets in the city, a mainly pedestrian street and the main shopping area of central Stockholm, and it then drove into the big department store Åhléns. And Swedish radio, public service broadcaster, reported at least 3 people have been killed in the incident. And news just coming in of shooting in another area in central Stockholm, in the district called Fridhemsplan, which is a 20-minute walk away from Drottninggatan. So that's just coming in, reports from Stockholm.
So Peter, it appears that there may well be two separate incidents ongoing in Stockholm.
These are 2 separate areas in central Stockholm, and we have information regarding the shooting in the other district in Stockholm just coming in.
At this time of day, this truck has headed into the department store. How busy would central Stockholm have been? You mentioned that this was a pedestrian area.
Yes, it's a pedestrian area, and it's the main shopping district in central Stockholm, so a lot of people would be there on a Friday afternoon, and no vehicles driving at that place, usually.
Well, the latest we're hearing from Swedish police is that there are many injuries there. That presumably not surprising to you. How would a vehicle have gotten into that pedestrian area? Are there no barriers? Are there no security measures to guard against that?
There are barriers, but well, we don't have exact details of that. It's the same area where we had a terror attack 5 years or some 7 years ago. Where no one was killed, but the suicide bomber was killed. Police has not said that this is a terror attack, but of course they look at the situation very seriously.
In London, people are now very used to seeing armed police, seeing security barriers, particularly in and around Parliament. What is the level of security on the ground in Stockholm, in the Swedish capital?
Well, you can't really compare it to the situation in London. Of course, there are police in the city, but not in the way you see in London or in Paris. So it's a different situation here.
So it would not be the case that pedestrianised areas, as frankly happens in pretty much every city in the UK now, pedestrianised areas
not with machine guns or heavy or patrolling in that way that you see in both Paris and in London.
What is the view amongst the Swedish public about the likelihood of attacks such as this? If we assume for a moment that this was a terror attack, is this a prospect that the Swedish people have been considering, or is this a surprise in the way that it clearly appears to be?
Well, the police have for several years now talked about an increased risk, terror risk, so people have been prepared, and it has happened. We had a terror attack here 7 years ago, so of course everyone has thought about the possibility. It hasn't been confirmed yet that this is a terror attack, that is important to say.
Well, having advised the public to stay away from the city centre for obvious reasons, the Swedish news agency TT is now confirming that all subway traffic has been shut down in Stockholm. Our correspondent Lisa Holland is still with us. Images such as this, and again we must reiterate that we are as yet cannot confirm that this was a terror attack, although the police locally are investigating the possibility. It is so very easy for someone in command of a vehicle to cause significant amounts of harm with very little effort.
It is, and you know, we have this expression, don't we, a modus operandi of people who are inspired by Islamic State, and I must stress at this point that we have absolutely no evidence to say that this was a terror attack perpetrated by someone from Islamic State, save to say that the public service Swedish television station SVT is reporting that they have been told that Swedish police are treating the incident as a possible terror attack. And of course, at this stage, given recent events right across Europe, not least here in the United Kingdom on Westminster Bridge just a few weeks ago, and of course at the Christmas market in Berlin, not to mention the promenade in Nice last summer. Of course, there will be the suspicion that this vehicle-borne attack was a terrorist incident. Now, what we know is that it happened at about 3 o'clock local time in Stockholm, the Swedish capital. The suggestion is, of course, that this vehicle was used to drive through the crowd and then ended up in front of this department store.
I will obviously approach the end of this hour. These are live pictures from the centre of Stockholm, where police have confirmed that at least 2 people have died and many people have been injured after a truck ploughed into a department store in a pedestrianised area.